Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Services and Communities Overview and Scrutiny panel on Thursday, the 7th of May, 2026. I'm Councillor Buddy Anderson, and I will be chairing this meeting this evening. A few housekeeping items before we start. This meeting will be recorded and live streamed by Harbour District Council. Members and officers must use the microphones in front of them in order for this to work. Only two microphones, in addition to mine, may work at the same time. Mobile phones, please, could everybody in the room switch their mobile phones either off or on silent. And the fire exit is just over there, and the meeting point is at the top of Mill Hill Car Park. The first item on our agenda is apologies for absence. So Councillor Wellban and Councillor Nunn are now members of the Cabinet. So that's created a vacancy on the committee, and I believe Councillor Scott is filling one of those vacancies. So welcome back, Councillor Scott. Other than that, do I have any apologies for absence? Councillor Elliott?
Lynn Taylor's just texted me to say that she'll be a few minutes late. She's on her way home from work.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other apologies for absence at all this evening? No. Okay, that's fine. Item 2, declarations of interests. Does anybody here have any interests they wish to declare? Okay. And then item 3 is the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of February. If the panel's in agreement that these minutes are accurate, then I will sign them. But please do let me know now if there is any amendments that need to be made. Excellent. I will therefore sign the minutes. Okay. Item 4, which is delivery, provision and management of affordable housing review. In a moment, I will invite Raj Patel, our strategic housing officer and housing and enabling officer, to present the report. He can also help answer any questions the panel have. Also giving up her time and kindly joining us is Councillor Nunn, who is the new portfolio holder for wellbeing and housing. So housing services falls under her remit. And I will now pass over to Raj to introduce the report.
Thank you very much, Chair. The report itself is quite detailed, so I have no intention of going through it in a great deal of detail, but to pick out some of the salient points which will help the discussion or any questions that you may have. Ultimately, there are 3 key pieces of legislation which place a mandatory duty to cooperate with partners, housing associations. I'll refer to RPs as housing associations. RPs basically is a new acronym. It's not new, but it's the most current acronym, and it means registered providers, but ultimately we're talking about housing associations. So there's 3 key pieces of legislation which place a mandatory duty, and they are to do with all things social housing and homelessness per se. We in Harbour have adopted a partnering approach in terms of our relationship with housing association partners. This means we work very closely with Homes England, the key government body responsible for governance and managing housing associations. And we work closely in terms of having what we define as preferred partners, which means we develop very close working relationships, and we try and ensure that they meet with our strategic aims where housing delivery is concerned, and that's quite an important point. Some local authorities allow a free-for-all. They will allow developers to choose their own partners and come in. We don't think that that's appropriate in terms of ensuring that we get the delivery of housing that is in most need within our district. So we try and court very, very close working relationships. We're currently doing that with our developer partners as well, and I'll come on to discuss that in a little more detail. There are a number of ways in which our housing associations develop social housing: acquisition of housing units, redevelopment of infill and existing housing schemes, purchase and development of sites, partnership for development on sites owned by ourselves, the local authority, and development of all affordable schemes. The relationship in terms of housing development is carried out by me, the strategic and enabling officer, and I am the first point of contact between the housing associations and the council. And particularly more pertinent is the planning consultations that we receive once applications are submitted. That's primarily the first point at which I will start the process of discussions with housing associations. Majority of the housing development in Harbour is through the main delivery vehicle, which is our Section 106 sites. And this has provided over a number of years the bulk of our affordable housing provision in the district. Currently, we're experiencing some very challenging times, and I'll come on to that in a little more detail. But in terms of our negotiations, we tend to dictate in terms of the profile that we would like to see in the district. And that's based on need and existing data that we have available. And based on that, we work on a site-by-site basis. It's horses for courses. And each scheme that we come up with is geared to that specific site. So we don't have a very prescriptive approach. We are quite pragmatic in the way in which we assess sites in terms of the type, the mix of housing that we need. We work with Homes England, and primarily they're the main funding body for housing associations as well. And I'll come on to this in a little bit more detail later on. It's at the present moment we are experiencing difficulties, and it's the way in which Homes England is funding housing associations, which is causing an issue for us. We work across the board in terms of our larger settlements, primarily Market Harbour, Lutterworth, Broughton, Ashley, but we also work with very specific providers of housing who operate within the rural context. And we also work very closely with parish councils and landowners in terms of some of the particular developments that we need to kind of keep an eye on, particularly rural exception sites. So our district itself is very, very different, and it has a mix of different types of housing need across the various settlements, from our large urban centres to the very, very small parishes within the community within Harbour. Primarily, once the development work has completed and units are completed, then there is involvement from our housing services team. And we operate what's known as the choice-based lettings system, which is our waiting list. And through that waiting list, we allocate based on priority and the bidding process, allocate appropriate housing to those who are registered on our council's waiting list. We have service level agreements with our housing association partners, which will determine how they operate in the district. But primarily, the first round of nominations is 100% Harbour District Council. And then at the point that a relet happens, then it comes down to 50% of whatever's been negotiated with that particular housing association partner. So we need to work very closely with our partners within the lettings process as well. All the lettings, the rental lettings, which means social rent properties, affordable rent properties and intermediate rent properties are let through the choice-based lettings. Shared ownership and intermediate is somewhat different. The housing associations have their own waiting lists and they can let through those. We don't maintain a list as such. We can direct applicants to the appropriate housing association partner should they be interested in a home ownership product like shared ownership or the discounted open market sales units. So that's another difference in terms of how we need to work with our association partners. Recently, I took an analysis and there's an estimated 5,100 properties owned and managed by our housing association partners in Harbour District. It's quite significant because that's primarily the bulk of our social housing provision in Harbour. That data needs to be updated and I've requested new information from all the housing association partners. So within the next few months, I will have that data, which will give us a much more of a concrete figure in terms of the stock holdings that the housing associations hold within the district. Suffice to say, when I started in Harbour some 27 years ago, we had 3 housing association partners, and they were East Midlands Housing, the Montfort Housing Society, and Leicester Housing Association. And they were local partners in that they were locally based. They had a local office presence and maintained extremely close working relationships with Harbour District Council. Suffice to say that over the time, things have changed and organizations that were community focused have changed. They've had, through mergers and acquisitions, become part of larger entities which are almost national. And the key thing to note here is that that local focus has been lost to an extent. And now we are working with partners who are much, much larger, who have a national focus and strategically have other priorities beyond Harbour per se. And I'll come on a bit more about that. Platform Housing Association is our largest partner, and that's by virtue of our stock transfer. Now, we didn't transfer the stock to Platform. The stock in 2007 was transferred to a standalone housing association, newly created standalone housing association known as Seven Locks, which then, a few years on, became part of the Acclaim Group. The Acclaim Group, a few years beyond that, became part of the Waterloo Group. And Waterloo, a few years beyond that, became part of the Platform Group. And this kind of is a good demonstration in terms of what's happened to the housing association market. The majority of the partners that we had, and even the extended list that we've now got of some 12 associations that we work very closely with, are parts of extremely large groups. Not all of them, therefore, are active in Harbour District. We've got 4 or 5 who are completely inactive, but they have to be kept on our waiting lists because they hold stock in the district and they manage those properties. And we hope in the future that they will re-establish their focus back in Harbour. So we do have to maintain those relationships. Within that list, all of them are what's known as not-for-profit housing associations, which means that all the profit that they churn is ploughed back into the provision of new affordable housing. We now have for-profit organizations, and these came about some 10, 12 years ago, and we have one such association. It's called SAGE. They are a for-profit organization, and they're primarily funded through pension schemes. LNG is a good example. That's Legal in General. They have an affordable housing arm now, and they feel that investment within housing is a good bet. And so they choose to invest in social housing. And so we've got a number of housing associations which are for-profit organizations. We've worked very well with Sage, and they've picked up schemes which no other housing association was prepared to do so, and they've maintained their remit with working within the social housing structure in terms of the rent structures they have. So they've been very good. There is another association on our list which is known as Halo. Halo are specifically a provider of shared ownership units and nothing else. So they will not do rented units, but it's a very specific role that they have, and again they pick up schemes which other RPs, other housing associations will be reluctant to take. Over the years, demand has increased in Harbour in terms of social housing. It's had a year-on-year knock-on effect in terms of the numbers that are registered on our waiting list, and it doesn't seem to be the demand doesn't seem to be depreciating at all. In fact, it's been increasing, and over the last few years, that's more the case. On the report itself, I've listed the kind of benchmark profile housing need that we work to. Now, this serves as a guide in terms of negotiations that we have with our association partners and with Homes England, in terms of coming up with a viable, affordable housing scheme that is going to meet need. It's all about meeting need. So whilst we are reliant on the data that's contained, it serves as a guide. As I said before, our remit is to ensure that we provide appropriate housing on any given particular site. So it's a horses for courses approach. Applicants are advised, that's developers, to consult me at a very early stage, and this is where we start the process. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them will submit full planning applications without any discussions, and then they may feel that their nose is being put out of joint because I will make demands which do not replicate what they provided or appear to want to provide. But that's our role. We need to ensure that we get the right type of housing that we need in the district. The report itself covers two aspects. The first, which I've just gone through, which is the relationship we have with our association partners. The second is how have we done in terms of our delivery? And over the last 5 years, we've done well. We've exceeded our target at times, but the last 3 years, there's been a noticeable change. And there are two primary reasons for that. Matters that are not in our control. And the first has to do with the cost of living crisis. The impact of that has been significant on the housing market, not only the social housing market, but housing per se, including the market sale housing. So the impacts have been quite significant, and this has led to a number of challenges and difficulties in terms of our delivery rates. So in 2022, we achieved the highest number of affordable housing units that we'd ever done in the district, and we hit a target of 231, which was quite significant. I believe that was the second highest in the whole county, and I believe it was only Charnwood who had a higher rate of achievement than us. That has tailed off recently. If you look at the chart, the 5-year trajectory, it gives you an indication of what has been happening. So 2021, 207, 22, as I've said, 231. Then we begin a downward spiral, and that has to do with the impacts of COVID, the cost of living, and the way in which housing associations have chosen to work. As I've said before, our primary vehicle is Section 106. Our delivery is via Section 106. It almost sounds perverse, but the housing associations have recently been awash with money through the funding bids that they've generated with Homes England. And they've been given lots of grant funding through strategic partnerships where they are required to deliver X number of units in a particular region. Now, it's important that they've prioritized those schemes over and above the Section 106 schemes, and primarily it's because they cannot use that grant funding on Section 106 sites. There is no grant allowed on Section 106. So they have been prioritizing delivery through their own acquisitions on sites and working with developer partners, which has left no capacity, apparently, to deliver Section 106 commitments and obligations. In fact, all the bids that developers have been submitting, they've had nil returns. So over the last 3 years, we've had a downturn. There's a table which demonstrates what our trajectory was in terms of what our expectations were against our local plan target. Again, against that is our actual delivery, and you'll see the grey line is considerably dipping downwards. This year we've picked up a little, and we did 117 units, and it's anticipated that we'll improve on that slightly, but not significantly next year, because there is a site in Lutterworth which will deliver 72 units at Diverden Road. And beyond that, we see an increase in terms of delivery by developers on affordable home ownership product, primarily discounted market sales, and that has been increasing. Currently, we're having to renegotiate Section 106 agreements because our housing association partners are pulling out on schemes that they'd agreed to previously, and developers are then coming to us saying, well, what do you want us to do? And the only option for us is to do discounted market sales. So that is somewhat of an improvement in terms of what's happening. In Harborough, we have an interim policy document which sets the parameters in terms of what we would like to see in terms of the discounts that are offered. We set ours at 30%. There is an income ceiling of 80,000, joint income ceiling of £80,000. Attached to discounted market sales is also a local lettings criteria. So there has to be some connection to Harborough District. And there is also a key worker priority, which is awarded to applicants. So that's currently the main way in which we've been delivering on our commitments. Suffice to say that for the foreseeable future, it does not look very good. We will see a subtle improvement next year, but I suspect it'll take a few years before we see a return to the high delivery rates that we'd experienced in 2022. There is a part of the report which then goes on to the community safety's involvement. Now, that's not my remit, so I need to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions with regard to the report or what I've just said from members. Thank you very much.
Okay, firstly, thank you so much for that really robust overview of the report, and also would like to thank all the officers involved in getting this report to us. That was very interesting. I'll start with yourself, Councillor Austin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Raj. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Just a few questions, really. Initially, you were talking about the RPs that we work with quite closely. Thanks for the list, because we've got all the lists now and see who they are. Oh, and you mentioned that some are for profit and some are for non-profit. What's the sort of percentage in that wise between non-profit and for-profit people that we work with? Have we got?
Beg your pardon. If you look at the list, there is one provider, Sage Housing Association. They're the only for-profit organization we work with.
Right.
All the others are not-for-profit organizations.
Brilliant.
And the relationship there has been built over a considerable number of years, and they are historic partners that we've worked very closely
Right.
with.
So Platform Group is a non-profit
Correct.
organisation.
Correct.
Okay. Cool. It's just because obviously looking at the further on in the report when we're looking at environment teams' involvement with the RPs and any complaints and things like that, I noticed that Platform were the only group which we put a base mark against. So they're the ones which are getting all the complaints. I didn't see any from anybody else, you see. So I just wanted to make sure they weren't isolated in that. Secondly, with the number of units that we're delivering and the ability to be able to deliver on our targets, why are our hands tied in negotiating for properties only on a 106 basis? You know, is there anything that we can do to become more competitive and then make your job a little bit easier?
We've over the period of the last 3 years exhausted quite a number of alternate approaches. We've looked at gifted units. We've looked at other ways and means of delivering on our commitment. Suffice to say that we are, to an extent, reliant on our housing association partners to do the bulk of the heavy lifting, so to speak, in terms of our Section 106 sites. And it's been very difficult. They've just not been able to, for whatever reason, to pick up Section 106 commitments. So when I ask a developer to approach our list and ask them to submit bids for an affordable housing scheme, they've had nil returns, which means basically they've said they've ended up with all the associations saying, no, we can't do it. We do not have the capacity. And this has to do with the fact that they've been prioritizing their own delivery on their own sites and working with developers. And the key to this is that they can use their grant, which they've received from Homes England, on those sites. And they cannot use that grant on Section 106 sites. So obviously they are going to prioritize those sites where they can use their grant funding. Just to add to that, we are working very closely with developers to do a lot more discounted open market sales. It's becoming popular. Last year, I believe we did 15. This year, that's increased to 23, and I've got expectations that may improve to potentially 35 to 50 this year. The interest in that particular product is also increasing. So it helps a certain segment of the market and those wishing to acquire home ownership, but it doesn't help anyone on our waiting list who are looking for rented properties. And that's where the issues for us and every other local authority is likely to be. This is a national issue. This isn't just confined to Harborough.
So without trying to reinvent the wheel, how do you see anything changing to enable you to do your job and to be able to do it? Are your hands tied because of S106?
To an extent they are, but we are looking for new partners, and there are a few green shoots beginning to appear, particularly with some of the smaller housing associations. We've got one on our list known as Futures. Now, that relationship developed about 3 years ago, but they're a very small Daventry-based organization, and they seem to be picking up some sites. And we've heard from other housing association partners. Orbit is a good example. Orbit has been inactive for the last 15 years, but I understand that they are now strategically going to prioritize Harborough, and they are looking for Section 106 commitments. So we need to watch this space and see if they actually submit bids.
That's quite encouraging. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you for your report, Raj. In relation to, I'm looking at points 3.8 to 312 on your report, actually. I noticed you say that the registered providers are actually encouraged to advertise vacancies. So there's no statutory, there's no incentive to do that. It's just up to them if they want to. Also that in terms of we advertise social housing on behalf of registered providers. So we're doing I would believe we're doing a valuable
Correct.
Valuable help to them. So is it sort of an arm's length relationship we have with some of these registered providers? It doesn't seem to be. We don't seem to be working together. There's no cohesion. I can't see. There's sometimes there's not.
It's a difficult one to circle. We work with a core group of partners, and we'd like to think that we have a very strong working relationship. And even with the lettings process, we have service level agreements. We've had issues with a few who didn't want to work through the choice-based letting scheme or through our waiting list, but I think we've managed to overcome that. And I think the process of working very closely with a core group of housing associations does have its merits in that respect. At first stage, yes, we get 100% nominations, but after that, we are determined by the service level agreement we have with each association partner. That'll dictate just how much in terms of nomination rights that they will afford to Harbour District. And it's generally about 50% with the majority of the association partners that we have.
Move on from that. Are you part of the corporate management team in terms of S106? Do you have a say in at the top level in Harbour, or would you like to have some input at that level?
I think that's a question for Anna. I don't think I'm part of the corporate management team where Section 106 is concerned.
Because I understand there was a rejig of the S106 team recently this year, and it was seen that there wasn't a structure. The structure was missing, and I just wanted to know whether that happened.
It may be terminology, because the corporate management team is the directors, deputy and chief executive, and myself. So whereas I think what you're talking about,
senior management.
yes, so you're talking about exactly right, the working group that's been set up that talks about when we've got Section 106 funding coming in for example, community facilities and so on, making sure that that money is delivered, because we've sometimes had challenges over making sure that delivery happens in the past. So you're asking about whether or not we should also ensure that Raj and other officers in the housing team are part of that group moving forward.
And have a say in actually have a say in actually structuring S106 better.
And not being part of that group myself, and I don't think Anna and Raj are, we could take it away as a potential recommendation to look at whether that should happen if it's not already.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, just on Councillor Scott made a comment about having an arm's length relationship with the RPs. This might not be for yourself, Raj, but this panel has been pretty keen to get some of these providers in here, specifically the largest provider. And I am keen to see a recommendation where this scrutiny panel keeps this subject alive. Like, we have an overview of this, and I'm really appreciative of that. But I think that the panel needs another bite of the cherry. I guess my question for officers would be who was asked, why aren't they here, and how difficult is it? I sort of already know the answer to this, but I think the panel needs to hear in some way why we're struggling to get any of them to sit in front of us, basically. We don't bite.
I'm happy to take that. That form were initially approached when this report was coming forward. I think they said, well, actually, we'd love to come along, happy to talk to you at some point. It's just today is going to be really difficult. And after we had some further discussion around that, the joint scrutiny, I know there were some further conversations, but it was going to be challenging to them. And actually, one of the more fundamental things is why just platform, and why not some of the other providers too? So there is the potential. We've got to look at next year's work programme. So if you're interested in exploring this more as a committee, there's a potential where you go away, and potentially it might be good to look at as more of a task and finish type activity, because there's quite a lot of grounds we could cover, quite a lot of different things we could talk to the housing providers about and get quite a few of them round the table as an activity to take forward over the next year.
Can I just add to that, that in the past, we did have a specific focus where RP partners were invited for members, and that was a kind of standalone meeting that we had once a year, and we did have a core group of partners who attended. So it may be something that we need to kind of undertake once again.
Yes, I agree. Councillor Nunn, would you like to come in?
Yeah, well, first of all, I was good to say what Raj has just said, that we did do that, and it always used to be very successful. And I knew how keen that this panel was to have the registered providers here. So at my first briefing with Kat last week, it was one of the things I've raised, hence why Leah said about the possibility of being able to do something later in the year.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I would be keen to see that sort of, I'm pretty open to it. It is for the next panel to ultimately decide, but I definitely think, given the joint committee we had the other week, it was clearly a strong feeling of councillors' inboxes being filled with residents that are unable to get in touch with their providers more than anything. And that seems to be the big chronic issue, is trying to sort of bridge that gap in that relationship. And you mentioned earlier about sort of Waterloo becoming platform and that. I know a little bit about this because many years ago I used to be a shared owner in one of those buildings. And my feeling was that as they did get bigger, getting hold of someone to help you when you're in distress. And when I say distress, I'm not talking about just the carpet in the corridors being dirty or something. I'm talking about, you know, something's leaking into your home. It was impossible to get hold of anybody. So that would be something I would recommend that this panel look at, is how do we bridge that gap so that residents are able to get hold of their providers, because a lot of them feel, in my view, abandoned. So that would be something that I think would be worth looking at. Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I totally echo your comments. I just wondered, is there an officer from the environment team here tonight? I don't know which department Anna works in. Are you in housing as well, or are you environment?
So I'm the head of regulatory services, so housing, environment, lots of things sit under me.
So
yeah.
are you able to respond to the issues with regards to the community safety team and the environment team's response and liaison with the registered providers as to how you get on with them, what the outcomes are from these complaints? It doesn't actually specify the outcomes.
So from an environmental health point of view, the database that we have at the moment makes it really tricky to define between different housing providers. So we don't actually record where we've had a housing complaint, which housing provider it's come from. So we're changing that as part of the Renters' Rights Act at the moment. So that will make it a lot easier for us to potentially come back to a future meeting, if you'd like, to go through, I suppose, the complaint detail in a bit more detail once the system is set up and once we've then sorted that out. Essentially, the officers will deal with complaints. We advise people to go to the registered providers first to see if they can resolve their complaint. The team then work with the registered providers to respond and deal with those complaints. So we do get things actioned. We just ask them to go to the providers at the first point of contact, because essentially that's the correct route to follow, and to come to us only if they struggle with that. We do help them.
If I can come back, Chair. So let me get it right then. So I'm a tenant. I have an issue in my house, whatever one of these may be. Let's say it's housing disrepair. I come to the council because I can't get hold of anybody at the registered provider, because we all know how difficult it is to get hold of anybody at these providers, particularly the main provider, which is in the report. They come to you or your team. Do we have, or your team have, a good relationship with, and it's going to be platform at the bottom line, and do you follow up to find out that the complaint that's come to you because tenant A can't get hold of platform is actually resolved to their satisfaction? Does anybody go back to the tenant and check up? And secondly, if I could ask you, if we start finding that one provider is constantly the complained provider, what action do we take in relation to that provider being our registered provider? Do we tell them, sort yourself out, or you're no longer with us, or we won't support you, or however it works? I don't know how it works. Are we lumbered with these people forever? Or can we get rid of them and move somewhere else if they just don't do what they're supposed to be doing, I suppose, to get it down to brass tacks?
I'd have to refer to Raj on that one. But essentially, if a complainant came to us to say that they couldn't get hold of their provider, then absolutely, yeah, we would pick that up and we would deal with that on their behalf. We make sure where we're aware of them that we follow through, and we then provide regular updates to them so that people are aware. Yeah.
Just to add to that, we can remonstrate and try and encourage them to get something done. And in the past, where I've had member inquiries which are forwarded on, they seem to be dealt with fairly quickly. So perhaps that's there's some comfort in that. Beyond that, we really have no powers in terms of any enforcement that we can take, given that they hold properties in our district, and this is where the issue is. So as much as I'd like to say to the likes of Places for People and Orbit and Paragon, who've been inactive for the last 15 years, go away, please, I cannot do that, because they still hold stock, they still manage properties, and unfortunately, that's where we're at. And we really don't have any control in terms of enforcement or the way in which operationally they operate within the district in terms of their housing management function.
Councillor Nunn?
Yeah, mine's sort of following on from what John asked, 'cause whenever I read this, I was making an assumption that I assume the 27 complaints that we receive about the housing providers are going to be a small drop in the ocean to what actually goes to the providers. It's only those people that are dissatisfied that then come back to us.
Councillor Scott?
Ask a question that may well have been answered before, but the registering a registered provider, they are registered with us as Harbour District Council?
No, they're registered with the Homes England agency, which is primarily the agency that regulates them and ensures governance. We don't have any registration as such, although in Harbour, what we've done with our partners is to ensure if an housing association wanted to come on board, we sit down with them and ensure that they are committed to the district in terms of delivering on our commitments and our strategy. But beyond that, there's no regular registry requirement. No.
It strikes me then that Homes England don't fit in properly into the system that we run. Really, they're in the way, I think, rather than helping. So.
Councillor Austin?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So really, what you've just told us there, Raj, is we've got no authority to tell them to do anything. We bend over backwards for them so that they get the business out of these sites. We don't own the properties, they do. So what we're basically doing is going to them cap in hand and saying, please, would you have some of our residents live in your property? And then when something goes wrong, we've got no legal right to turn around and say, get it sorted out, or else we have to go to Homes England, who seem to be the people who have the legislation behind them, and cap in hand and say, can you sort this out, please? Is that basically...
That sums it up in a nutshell, but even then Homes England will revert back to ourselves
To us?
to resolve.
Who has no authority to do anything?
And the problem here is that there are 3 pieces of legislation which I highlight, which places a mandatory duty on us to cooperate with housing associations and social housing providers and homelessness.
I think that's enough for it.
Any other comments or questions about this very sobering report? Councillor Taylor?
Nothing else to add about that, but I just wanted to say thank you and apologies for coming in late for your presentation. I got held up at work, and also to say there was nothing to declare for members' interest. So just that.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Okay, so hopefully one of the officers at the top table has been, I'm not sure whom it is, been formulating some recommendations or a bit of an overview. Is that yourself, Alec?
So these are the ones I have so far. Let me know if you're happy with them or have any amendments. So the first one is that officers reconsider the membership of the Section 106 working group to include the strategic housing and enabling officer and other relevant officers where appropriate. The second one I have is when setting the scrutiny work programme for the next municipal year, 26-27, to consider a task and finish group to review the council's working relationships with the registered providers, to learn more about how they provide services, sharing good practice, focusing on how they deal with customer complaints and concerns.
Yes, very good. Anything to add to that? Well, in that case, I suppose if there's no dissent, then that could just be moved and we can go on to the next item. Thank you again so much. And thank you to the officers for getting this report in front of us. I don't believe this is over for scrutiny, but we will move on for the time being. Item 5, to review the operation of civil enforcement service and partnership. Firstly, I believe Anna has a presentation for the panel, and an advance copy of this was circulated beforehand along with the agenda. So, Anna, over to yourself.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to introduce Steve Compton as well, who I've brought with me. Steve is the Parking Services Manager here at Harborough, so save all your tricky questions for him. Okay. Thank you. So what I thought I'd do as part of this presentation is run through some parking principles with you, and some explanations of on-street and off-street, and then what the different partners do that are part of the partnership, to hopefully try and explain it a little bit for you, so you've got more of an understanding, because it is quite complicated. So save up your questions. I'm sure there'll be plenty. So parking principles. So parking restrictions form part of wider traffic management duties, and our key principles are keeping traffic flowing, road safety, and then managing curbside space. What we're not doing with parking is thinking about raising money. So the parking services that we provide should be a cost neutral service. We shouldn't be making lots of money out of them. So the background. Civil enforcement of both on and off-street parking restrictions is undertaken through our partnership between Leicestershire County Council, the districts and the borough councils within Leicestershire. Leicestershire County Council provide the centralised administrative service for penalty charge notices, and the districts undertake the enforcement activity. So on-street parking, so you know, is double yellow lines, bus stops, limit weight bays, things like that. Off-street parking is council-owned and operated car parks. So they are quite separate. Even though Steve and his team do the enforcement of both, the county council are responsible for on-street and the district and borough councils are responsible for off-street. So the civil enforcement officers are employed by the district councils. They undertake all of those duties and they issue PCNs to vehicles that essentially are found in contravention. So the current partnership agreement is between the County Council and the 7 district and borough councils. It dates back to 2007. The performance of the partnership is closely monitored. There is a parking board, which we'll come on to in a slide in a minute. That's chaired by the County Council, and representatives from the districts and boroughs attend those meetings. The partners, we do recognise that that is out of date. In a meeting in February 2024, it was agreed that we would continue to operate in accordance with the principles and the intent of the agreement until a review and a refresh was completed. So, yeah, that agreement essentially defines the joint working, how we do it and how we work as a partnership. So the oversight of the parking management. So as I've said, the County Council run meetings. So we have a steering group, a parking board, and an operational liaison group. All of these feed into each other. They're headed by the County Council as the Highways Authority, but then decisions are made as a group. So the CEOs are employed by Harborough District Council, but we then deliver services for the County Council and for other district and borough councils. So the role of Leicestershire County Council. So as I've said, they are the Highways Authority. They're responsible, as you'll be aware, for the management of the road network and then the enforcement of the highway restrictions. So again, that's the double yellow lines, the bus stops, limit weight bays, things like that. The district and borough councils then do the council-owned off-street car parks. Okay. The county council also have 2 electric camera cars that they use. So these mainly work on the school keep clears across the county. They've got 170 schools that have joined the scheme. So essentially, if there are schools in your areas where you feel there are parking issues, you can raise those with the county council. They will then add them to the list, having consulted with the school, making sure there are appropriate orders in place to be able to enforce, and they can then visit those schools and ticket people. They can also work on certain bus stop locations and along the red route, that's on the airport. So the County Council carry out the notice processing for all authorities in the partnership. So in this case, Harborough are a contractor and a client. So the County Council undertook an audit of this service in August 2024 to provide assurance to the management of the County Council that the partnership was operating effectively. That confirmed that the things that we were doing are timely, accurate and complete, and the overall opinion was one of substantial assurance with no high priority recommendations identified. So the role of Harborough District Council in Harborough District. So the CEOs, the civil enforcement officers, work throughout Harborough District. They maintain the pay and display machines. They undertake car park maintenance. The council undertake car park maintenance in the district, and the team also grant permission to use car parks for events or works. So when we do when the Christmas fair happens and the fun fair comes to the car park, the Commons car park, Steve and his team issue a license to enable them to use that car park. Okay. So then we've got the Harborough District and Borough Partnership. So this is the Harborough 4. So Harborough do the enforcement and management of on and off street parking in Harborough. So the on street for the county, the off street for Harborough. And then we also undertake this function for Melton, Hinckley, Blaby, Oadby and Wigston. But we don't do the enforcement of council owned car parks in Hinckley. That's done by Hinckley themselves. So Steve, Steve and he manage his team. The team essentially work out the daily distribution of civil enforcement officers across all of those areas. So everybody pays for a portion of the time. Steve then works out where they need to be, when they need to be, and we move them around depending where, if somebody's off sick, we'll move someone to cover that. We also maintain the pay and display machines in Harborough, Oadby and Wigston, Blaby and Melton on behalf of those partners. So the CEOs will ensure that the machines are working every morning. They'll sort out any ticket jams and essentially deal with any initial issues with the parking machines to make sure that they're working for those partners. So I've got an extra slide here that I've added in. So this is our current position, just to give you an update of where we are now. So you'll be aware, hopefully, that the new machines were installed in late 2025. We've had lots of positive feedback from members of the public about those, which is good. There is a capital programme for works in the council-owned car parks. The assets team deal with that for us. So that's things like resurfacing, lining, signage and lighting. Staffing, so we have had some issues with the numbers of CEOs over the years. We are currently running at 9.8 FTE, and we've got another 3 that are due to start next week. Yep. Our full complement is 13 officers, so that's across the whole of the partnership, but employed by us. So by the end of next week, we'll be up to 12.8, so ever so nearly there. And then we've also had the planning permission approved recently for the installation of the EV charging project in the Commons car park. Okay, that's a really quick run through. Any questions?
Councillor Austin.
The first one is, who's the 0.8 employee?
So that's made up of a couple of officers because some of them do different work patterns. So we've got part-time officers, we have full-time posts, part-time posts. Essentially, because we've struggled to recruit people to this role, we're quite flexible about how they would want to work. So, you know, if they only wanted to do 2 long days, we'll have them. You know, if they want to do shorter days, again, Steve and his team have spent a lot of time working out kind of like compressed weeks, routes, you know, how we can get the best out of the service and how we can make it as attractive to people to come and want to do that job as we possibly can.
More sensible note. The income from the car parks,
Mhm.
is that what goes towards paying for the CEOs in its entirety, or is it something which is supplemented by the council itself, or does it come from the different parishes like Melton and Blaby where they have their own sort of local, because obviously you've got Blaby District Council. Do they pay into the Harbour District Council for this provision, things like that?
Yes, yes. So we set an annual fee as to how much our partners will pay us. So yeah, so we charge Blaby, Oadby, Melton, the county council then. So the county pay for the portion of on-street parking in Hinckley because they are responsible for on-street. So yeah, absolutely, we bill them. Harbour residents don't pay for enforcement in other areas.
Finally, you did say right at the outset that Leicestershire County Council is responsible for on-street parking. We only are responsible for our off-street council parks. Yet we're still responsible for on-street parking in Harborough. So how does that work then? So
we undertake that. So the county council are responsible for on-street across the whole of the county. So that's probably just the way I've said it. So Harborough are responsible for, we undertake the on and off street enforcement in Harborough, but we only have jurisdiction over our car parks. We cannot direct people where to go on street or anything like that. That is the county council that tell us that, and they then pay for that.
Got it. Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
Couple of questions. It's great knowing that you're going to be building up to the 13 full-time employees, but it's all about churn, isn't it, really, as well? And I imagine it's not the job that a lot of people would choose if they had a lot of jobs to choose from because of the abuse that they must receive from members of the public. I spoke to a very helpful gentleman the other day called Ahmed, who was one of your guys, and he was very helpful. Is there an element of strategically placing some of these enforcement officers at pinch points that you're aware of in locations? I mean, schools were mentioned, but there are shops that people just flagrantly abuse the double yellow lines outside of, and they can cause severe problems. So is there some strategies of getting someone on a bike? I think, are these guys on bikes or in cars generally?
So the way that we operate the enforcement is it's quite dynamic depending on which area they're into. So some areas it might be that a Tuesday is a market day. So the officers will be concentrating their efforts in that area because that's where the lines are abused and where it's congested. And they're aware of this. So we do have areas that are known hotspots. And when we've got the resources available, then we direct staff to those areas at key times to counter that. As Anna's touched on already, previously, in fact, since COVID, we found it really difficult to recruit. Exactly as you've just said, we're not an attractive option to a lot of people when you consider for the same money or more, they could be working in a warehouse where it's nice, warm and dry, and they're not going to get the abuse. Now, recently, we've had an influx of applicants, and hopefully, touch wood, they'll all be successful in what they're doing. And as you've said, we're at 12.8 FTE, and that's the highest we've been at since pre-COVID. That's how much of a struggle it's been to recruit. But yes, in answer to your question, we're aware of the hotspot areas where there are problems where people abuse the on-street restrictions. The county council will ask us to pay more attention to those areas, and we direct officers to there at peak times.
Additionally, I think I'm going to answer my own question, which I generally do, is in terms of it'd be Leicestershire County Council that look after weight restrictions in villages. Is it? It's nothing to do with your parking enforcement, because I've stopped lorries before now and asked them if they're delivering to villages or they're not, and they've got certificates to do that and permission to do that. But that's Leicestershire, is it? County Council, that's.
So it's not my field. It's either going to be Leicestershire County Council or Leicestershire Police that would deal with that with a weight restriction. We do in certain areas enforce overnight HGV parking, but they're very limited. There's not many of those areas in Leicestershire. But as far as a weight restriction goes, yeah, that's certainly not us that would be responsible for that.
I basically have a house that's shaken apart by over 7.5 ton lorries going past at all times of the day, taking shortcuts into Leicester. So thank you very much for your answer.
Councillor Elliott.
Yeah. Anna, I think you mentioned that the highways have 2 vehicles that will monitor around schools and that. How do we get in touch with them? Is there a number, or who do we get in touch with, please?
So the county council have an online form on their website that you can use to report anything to do with parking. So essentially, if there are issues in your local area, and equally, you can use the form to request or to highlight a school where you think there might be an issue. Equally, I would use that first, but if you want to copy us in on that as well, then we can make sure that that gets sent to the right place for you.
Councillor Austin.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, the idea of getting CEOs into specific areas. I mean, as a driver myself, I'm fully aware if I see a parking attendant, just walking around, really, visibility is half the job, really, isn't it? Certainly when it comes to on the street and things like that. But do you have the facility to be able to utilise CCTV, for instance, which will obviously show up in real time where there may be parking issues throughout our district, and be able then to point people in that way, or is it purely by word of mouth, stroke somebody phoning up complaining, or indeed like local police officers saying, oh, there's a problem over here? I don't know how you get that information real time.
Okay, so it's the county council that correlate this information, and then they'll send an enforcement request over to ourselves, where we then direct the officers out to those areas. So we don't have the facility to use CCTV. We don't have any information coming back from CCTV about problem areas. It's normally the general public that will send a complaint into the county council, or they'll send it to us and we'll redirect it to the county council. They will then correlate all that information. And as I say, directors, what we can't do is offer an on-demand service because we don't have the resources. So very often the reason for that is, as you'll appreciate, you can receive a complaint about a vehicle parked in contravention, and by the time we've sent someone out there, they're gone. So it's a waste of time. So what we do is we wait until we've received a number of complaints. Well, not us, it's the county council, receive a number of complaints, and then they'll say, right, okay, there's obviously something going on here. Can you send an officer out to have a look? And it might just be an increase in patrols. As you said quite rightly, the deterrent is the first line of defence. That's the point of them being walking around in a high-vis uniform. However, as you'll also appreciate, that doesn't always work, and that's when you come back to issuing a PCN.
Of course, Councillor Scott.
Additional question. I'm just interested in this particular aspect of it. You can only enforce where there is lines that are close to the area where people are parking, or they're actually parking on double yellow lines. I mean, I'm particularly concerned with pavement parking sometimes, when people having to walk out in the middle of the road to avoid 4x4s parked 3/4 of the pavement. And is that, if you found that to be a problem and something you can do anything about? Or?
So currently, you're correct. There has to be a restriction on the road surface, and that restriction should be a no waiting restriction, so a single or double yellow line. I'm going to sound like I'm teaching you about parking now, and I don't mean to, but it's the only restriction that is valid from the centre of the road up until the building line, so it covers grass verges and the footpath. So if a vehicle was parked on the footpath, we could then take action against it. That's the only circumstance where we can issue currently to vehicles parked on the footway. However, there is legislation coming in, which it's all down to the county council and what their policies are and how they want to introduce it as the authority responsible, whereby we may be able to issue to any vehicles parked in certain areas that park fully on the pavement. It's for them to sort out that. We've had nothing back from them as yet to give us any guidance on how that will be implemented. But yeah, at the moment, it's a no waiting yellow line restriction that would cover the footpath as well as the road surface.
Councillor Bateman.
Thanks, Chair. This is a bugbear of mine, and I had this when I was the cabinet lead in the last administration. The CEOs do a fantastic job for parking. What I can't get my head round is why we can't train the CEOs to be multifaceted, so they could be trained to issue a fixed penalty for littering. While they're walking around looking at the parking restrictions, and they see somebody up the road drop a load of litter or whatever, why can't they go and deal with that? Why can't they deal with dog fouling if they see it occur while they're on patrol moving from A to B? I can't get my head round why we can't make them trained so they can do all three things. It's a bit like my previous life as a police officer. I was a traffic cop, but if I saw somebody break a window, I wasn't going to drive by because that's not a traffic offence. I'd deal with it because they're committing an offence and you've got to be multifaceted. So is there a reason why we can't make our CEOs be more effective across the board of the things that people moan about? Because we all know it's speeding, parking, dog fouling. They're the three things that everybody complains about. And we deal with one by way of parking, which is great. Footpath obstructions is a police matter, nothing to do with parking restrictions, unfortunately, at the moment. But I just wonder if there's any reason why we don't look at training the CEOs up to do more things than just the parking. I appreciate that that's where a lot of the funding comes from, but could we use them in another way? Thanks, Chair.
So to give you a little bit of background on that, I started off in parking as a parking attendant back in 2005. And then when the police transferred their powers over to the local authorities, otherwise known as DCRIM, we then became civil enforcement officers. That was back in 2007. And running alongside that, we actually introduced environmental crime. So the civil enforcement officers could do littering from vehicles, dog fouling, fly posting, distribution of unauthorised printed matter, things like that. And at the time I was based in Hinckley and we were issuing fixed penalty notice on behalf of Hinckley Borough Council. However, the legislation changed and now prohibits a civil enforcement officer from doing any other work other than parking, which is what prevents us. Equally, what we did find when we were doing both was the amount of time involved in supporting one fixed penalty notice would be quite considerable compared to issuing a penalty charge notice, because you'd have to go back to the office, write up a witness statement, which has to be just so, and that has to be submitted to the local authority and so on. So actually for one fixed penalty notice, a lot of time was taken up from one officer where their prime job is actually to be dealing with parking.
Okay, I will draw this discussion to a close now. I don't know if there's specifically been any recommendations that have arisen from the debate.
So Leah identified an interesting point there we could suggest to the committee, which is we could have the chair of the committee write to the county council to encourage them to adopt the legislation that enables enforcement of pavement parking.
Would anybody like that to be a recommendation? Does that sound like a good idea?
Yeah, so it's the chair of the committee writes to the county council to encourage them to adopt the legislation that enables the enforcement of pavement parking.
Yeah, I'll just happily nominate that. Move that.
Okay, that's a good recommendation. We have that then. I don't, was there anything else or was that it? No, of course.
I was just thinking about, in terms of what you said about it's hard to recruit into the roles and and the abuse they often get. Is there any sort of support that they can access, or, you know, in terms of, again, ideally you'd want people to stay enrolled for as long as possible, given the amount it costs to train them up, but also from a sort of a mental health point of view, they're doing a really tough job. I saw a parking attendant get, you know, really a lot of verbal aggression from a member of the public, and I just wanted to, I'm assuming those support structures are in place, but is that something that needs a bit more resources, or do you feel that you've got enough support to allow the CEOs to do pretty demanding job?
So you're right, it's a very challenging job, and it takes a certain type of person to be able to do that role. It's different to any other role because you are on your own and you have very little authority other than your own verbal communication skills to resolve any situation that you come in contact with someone who's going to be particularly aggressive. So what we provide is a lone working device, which is GPS tracked, goes through to an accredited call centre, and they wear it on the outside of the uniform, one button depressed, and it goes straight through to a call centre that can monitor that. Should they feel, then it's two-way communication, should they feel that the police are needed, they can bypass the 999 system and arrange for the police assistance. Equally, they're all supplied with a body-worn video camera. That works on a 30-second loop. So when it gets to the 30 seconds, it will start overriding the other seconds unless they activate it. So it will always save 30 seconds prior to them activating it. On top of that, we've got our own internal, well, our employee assistance helpline. But more importantly, as a team, we have an open door policy, which includes not just myself, but the supervisors, whereby if they've had a bad day, they're welcome to come and see me, come and see the other supervisors. They can pick the phone up. And this is what forms quite a close bond between the team, because if they need to discuss something that's upset them, we'll tell them, go back to the office, make yourself a cup of tea, you know, we'll come over and speak to you and give you the best advice we can. And that is how we work the majority of the times. Obviously, there are going to be exceptions to that where someone needs more support, and we have systems in place to support them for that.
Yes, that's good to hear, Steve. And I think that actually, to me, sounds like a pretty robust process. I'm quite impressed, actually. So, I mean, we could put it as a recommendation, but I feel like it's pretty strong. But there's no harm in. Yeah. Okay. Well, if we're all happy with that, we can move on to the next item. Thank you very much, Steve and Anna, for your time on that matter. Okay, item 6. So I will admit I was a little bit confused about this item because we are not, as I've mentioned several times, the panel for 2026-27 is going to decide their own work plan and have much more autonomy over that. So it says here if there's any questions, additions or amendments to that, but perhaps one of the officers would like to explain what it is that we're discussing it, just so everybody's aware.
I think we've put this on here possibly because we usually put it on here, and it does give you a bit of an overview of actually what you've already done during the year, but I appreciate it's possibly not the most helpful at this time to receive it. What we did have go out yesterday was the forms for councillors to complete if they've got things they'd like the scrutiny committee to be looking at next year. So please get filling those in if you've got some ideas of things you'd like the committee to look at. And then when the rota of meetings is fully shared, there is going to be a joint scrutiny meeting fairly early in the civic year, which will incorporate all of those ideas coming forward. It's gone to all councillors as well. So anyone that's coming onto the committee, other members who aren't on the committee can contribute. We can look at all those ideas, have a good workshop where we decide what the work programmes will be. And then during the year, if we need to amend it, we do.
Okay. Is there any questions about any of that or anything that anybody feels needs clearing up on that item? Okay, fair enough. I just thought I'd put that one out there because I'd already had the ability to ask that question myself. That brings on to item 7, which is the Scrutiny Recommendation Tracker, which provides an overview of the recommendations made by the panel, and the panel is invited to review the outcomes of those recommendations. As noted in the report, the recommendations put forward by this panel on the 5th of February 2026 with regards to the Open Spaces Strategy Review shall be considered by Cabinet on the 11th of May. Do any members wish to comment on this tracker? Well, I think we're all in agreement that we like the tracker. We've had some pretty good feedback about the tracker, and I think that has been a noticeable difference in the last year, because there has been a feeling that sometimes scrutiny is not as robust and we're not really seeing what happens with that information. And the only comment I would make is I very much hope that it continues forward into the next administration and into the next year. Item 8 on the agenda, any urgent business. There is just one thing I would like to say. And after 2 years of being your chair, tonight appears to be my last night and my time has come to an end. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you as members and officers for the support, and on occasion, the kindness you've shown me as well. So I wish you all well. And the time is 7:45, and that is the end.